It's Wednesday, March 4th, and things are kind of moving forward slowly. Um, got the anhydrous bar out and doing a little bit of work on it. There were a couple bolts, not on anything very important, but kind of the bracket that holds the cylinders that fold the wings, that had kind of broken out the lock nuts, and when I got them out, the bolts were kind of mangled also, so putting in new ones there. Had to heat them up with a torch to get the nuts to come off. Basically, applying heat will swell the nut just from thermal expansion, and then that'll kind of break the rust loose. Got a few other things to do on this, just kind of mostly greasing stuff, but when I was going over the closing discs, I found one that seemed to be kind of loose in the bearings. So working on that. Need to replace an airbag and do a few other things on the truck. So we got it pulled into the shop now since the tractor is out. So the bearing that I'm replacing is in here, and I have a couple of bearings. I think it's like a dual row sealed bearing that goes inside there, and then there's also a grease seal that goes on the back side here. And the Zerk doesn't actually grease the bearing, it just sort of like pushes water out to keep water from getting in where the seals are. But I got 3 bolts out, and this one, it looks like, is kind of mashed, so I'm probably going to grind it off, because otherwise it's going to catch as it comes off of there, and it's a carriage bolt on the other side, so a square hole that holds the shank of the bolt. And it's going to be really hard to hold that tight enough that I can get it blown out of there unless I grind those threads off on that corner. So that's the next step. Then I don't remember exactly how these come apart, but basically the bearing is down inside between those two cast halves. And I don't think they're too bad to get out of there from what I remember. So I'm going to replace that, and then I've got a whole bunch of greasing to do. There's a grease zerk on each of those closers, and probably 3 grease zerks on the Coulter setup with the pivot pin, and some of them have a grease zerk on the swivel, I believe, and then also the one for the actual Coulter. Haven't gone through and checked the bearings on those yet. I think they're okay, but I didn't really look it over too close when I put it away at the end of last year, so I'm not sure what we're going to find there. I did get the RTK, I think, more or less working on the tractor, so kind of the plan is to get a few things tuned up on the toolbar, and then probably unhook and go run around with the tractor and get some AB lines set with the RTK. And hopefully it's not drying off as fast as I hoped, but I'm hoping that it'll dry off tomorrow sometime to be able to actually start putting some anhydrous on, but it seems like there's not any real big rush right now, just because things are still pretty wet as soon as you walk out there and kind of brush the residue off the top of the ground. It's pretty dry up here, just where there's no cover, but out in the field it's definitely pretty wet, even on the ridges, and that means the low spots are going to be really, really wet and probably an issue. So we've kind of been working on a few other random things as well, a few errands and random tasks. Have a tractor up at the tire shop, getting some new tires put on it, so that's done, and then we can hook it onto the planter and start working through planter stuff for preseason maintenance. And checked some bins to make sure that the grain was all in good shape, which it seems to be so far, although some of the corn didn't get as dry last fall as we wanted, so we're starting to run fans again now that we're getting some warmer, sunnier days, to hopefully bring the moisture down in the grain a little bit more. We don't have any plans to haul it out immediately, and it's not wet enough that it's going to cause a problem spoilage-wise, but we need to get it dried down just so we don't have moisture dock when we do haul it in. So that's where we're at the moment, just kind of some random stuff. Hopefully have some wheels turning in the field here in the next day or two. Able to grind off the mangled spot on that bolt and then use a little impact to buzz that nut right off of there. So got everything loose here and just going to kind of pull it apart now. So I think what actually is going on, basically we just have a bolt that sticks through here, so I'm going to have to clean up some of this rusty crap and get there's like a spacer here, it looks like, that I'm going to have to get knocked off. And then I think the bearing just sits right in here and probably has a bolt is all that goes through there, because I can kind of see the hex head in the grease. But then the back cover, or the blade in the back cover, there's a blade through the or a hole through the blade rather, that lines up with the grease zerk on this part, and then injects grease into the backside there, which, like I said, I think is mostly just to kind of fill the space around the bearing and everything, and avoid getting water where it can get to the seals, and then be able to pump grease in to kind of flush that crap out. But I'm hoping that I have the right stuff. Probably going to have to press the bearing out of this piece, it looks like, but I don't think it should be too big of a deal, hopefully. Famous last words. So after a little bit of targeted beating with my ball peen hammer here, I was trying to knock the bolt out of the center, but actually it ended up taking the bearing clear out of the housing here. Looks like that seal is actually installed backwards of what I would normally expect it to be. Anywho, it looks like we've got the bolt going through the middle, and then there's probably a spacer here, and I'm hoping that the bearing that I have is right. It looks like it's the correct size. I hope. But I think I'm going to have to probably put a little bit of penetrating oil and wire brush some of this rust off on the bolt here. Get it out here in the sun where it's maybe a little more visible. It's pretty crusty. But once I get the bolt out of there, then hopefully I'll be able to take the bearing with that spacer in the middle back to the press and get it pushed out from the back side and make double sure that I have the right stuff. I'm hopeful, but we'll find out. Alright, I got the bolt out, and it looks like the spacer is bigger on this end than this side, so it's just an issue of pushing it out, but it looks like I do have the right bearing. And I guess I didn't double check the number, but they're actually both Koyo bearings, 6006 RK, 6006 RK, so I definitely have the right bearing. So now it's time to go back to the press and see if we can pop this guy out. I should have specified when I was doing the video earlier, anytime that you're pushing on the end of a bolt or beating on the end of a bolt with a hammer, you do want to do something to protect the threads, so I had the nut on there when I was actually pushing on it. So we're back here. This is a old mechanical press, so it just has like a big screw at the top, but actually works very well. So I'm just going to rig up a piece of shaft that's smaller than that inner race of the bearing, and then we've got the metal pieces up against the sides of that, and I should be able to just push on that and knock it out the bottom. Alright, we got the other one pressed right out, super easy. So now we're going to put this one in. I'm just going to bring the press down here. And we got the spacer in. So now I'm just going to put everything back together. I may knock out the seal that was there before and go ahead and replace it while I've got stuff apart. But should be about a 15 to 20 minute project here to do the bearing on this one. And I guess, I don't know if I can still do it now, but basically the bearing is not totally shot, but you can feel quite a bit of play. If there's a little bit of play, usually I'll let it go for a while, just so that I'm not replacing stuff and spending a bunch of time that I don't need to. We don't cover a huge number of acres. But when they get real loose, you kind of run the risk of getting a lot looser quickly and then having a disc fall off in the field and having to go find it. So I'm going to go ahead and do this one. There might be one more that I do, but it seemed like most of them were pretty tight, so hopefully we won't have too much to do other than grease the coulters to get this thing ready to go. Alright, we got her back on. No wobble. Turns easy. On to the next. So it's about 4:30 and I'm just walking out here into the stubble to see how wet or dry things seem to be. It's pretty crunchy on the bean residue, but as soon as you peel it back, it's still pretty saturated. I was hoping that maybe I'd be able to run tomorrow, but if I am, it's going to be late in the day, I think, and that might even be a stretch still. The wind did come up this afternoon, and the sun shined most of the day, so it should have helped some, but we're on a fairly high spot, and this farm has a lot of tile in it, and it's still too wet here, which means the lower spots are going to be wetter yet, or the shaded spots. So I think we got a little ways to go yet. Probably some moisture will come up overnight as it cools off, and everything as well. So might get a few more shop projects done before I'm able to get into the field. I think I do have the anhydrous bar all ready to go now. I ended up, the closer that I took video of switching out earlier, ended up taking back apart and put the seal in backwards, which basically goes against everything I've ever learned about mechanicking. But it seemed like that was necessary in order to not blow the seal out when you greased that assembly. And again, I think the grease just kind of displaces things to keep water from getting into the bearing, because the bearing itself is sealed, unless like the way that the setup works somehow pushes through the seals of the bearing. I'm not entirely sure, but anyway, got that switched around. Had a few bolts that were actually just the lock washers were broken on the toolbar, got that fixed, and kind of pressure tested everything for the actual anhydrous delivery part of the system. So basically just pulled out a bleeder valve and then hooked up an air fitting so that we could pressurize everything with shop air and make sure that nothing was leaking before we actually hook it up to the anhydrous tanks. So I think we're all ready to go on that. I guess I need to check air in the tires, but that should be about the last thing. Everything else on the bar should be ready to go. So probably I'll go ahead and do tires here while I've got things unfolded in front of the shop, and make sure that that's all ready to roll. And then probably will unhook from this in the shop, and I don't know if I'll go try to get my AB lines set here this evening or just wait until tomorrow morning to do it, but probably will unhook from the tractor and just take the tractor out to do that. This is the only thing that I have that will do RTK, so we'll just go run around with it and get kind of lined up with some field borders and sand pipes on terraces and stuff, so that the rows are hopefully going the right direction in the right spots. So we'll see how far things go. If I get ambitious tonight, I might work on the gearbox for the combine. I guess Dad got the airbag switched out on the truck here this afternoon. We haven't aired it up to see how it's going to work, but hopefully everything should be good to go on that. Have a few other things to work on the truck, but nothing too serious. So mostly just kind of got it in here where it was handy to work on as we had time to. But if anything interesting happens, I'll try to take some video, see how things go.